I'm sure the public will be. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this emergency meeting of Horowhenua District Council, held on Wednesday, the 30th of March 2022. Could I please ask Robert if he would please open our meeting? Robert, could you just turn your mic on?
Kia ora koutou. E te rangatira, tēnā koe, te kauni here o tō tātou, o te rohe nei, tēnā koutou kia ora tātou katoa. Kia tātou katoa te atawhai tō tātou rika i o Karaiti, me te aroa o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ki ake, mene, te whakamoti mātou ki a koe te atua, te pāne ki te wānanga hei mua i a tātou, te wānanga whakahirehire o tātou. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi aroa ki a koe, tēnā koutou, āmene. Kia ora, Ernie.
Kia ora, Robert. Just, if you wouldn't mind turning that off. Right button, thanks. Ta. Okay, so let's get into our procedural matters. Apologies.
Apologies from Councillor David Allen and Councillor Victoria K. Simmons.
Can I move it? Councillor Jennings seconded, Councillor Tupapua, that those apologies be accepted. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. No public participation. Any late items? No. Any declarations of interest? No. Any announcements? Okay. We have one item of business that we are attending to tonight, which is changes to COVID-19 vaccine pass requirements for council facilities. Could I move 2.1, 2.2 that the report be received and that the matter is recognised as not significant? Councillor Tupapua, seconded Councillor Isaacs. All those in favour? Against? Carried. So, before we get into the recommendations, is there any officer making any addition to the report that we have in front of us?
No.
No, thank you. All right, so moving to 2.3, the council removes access restrictions to council facilities from 11:59 p.m. on the 4th of April 2022, which it imposed on the 21st of February 2022 in response to the COVID-19 protection framework. 2.4, that the council delegates to the chief executive officer in consultation with the mayor the authority to remove or impose access restrictions to council facilities in response to any future COVID-19 protection framework changes. 2.5, that council direct the chief executive to apply the following principles when imposing or relaxing any future COVID-19 access restrictions. 1, any restrictions are in line with but no more restrictive than the government guidelines or restrictions. And 2, restrictions are in place for at least amount of time and alignment with any staff COVID-19 policy, and options are provided for people affected by any restrictions to be able to access council services. Open up to the table. Are there any questions, clarifications sought? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question to the Chief Executive. I'm strongly of the view that the requirement should be removed immediately, and I just wanted to understand what the impact of a change in the recommendation or change in the resolution to removing the requirement immediately, what impact that would have, and how quickly that could be implemented.
Through the Mayor, thank you, Councillor Jennings.
there's a number of elements to consider in that. One is preparing the advice for posting on the website, and as such, my understanding is that we have that information ready to go live just as soon as the decision's been made, so that can happen very quickly. There is just time that would be required tomorrow, for example, if that was the wish of the meeting, to inform and advise our staff that are out there administering the facilities, but that could, I'm assured, could happen reasonably quickly.
Councillor Tukapu.
Just clarity on two things. The first being that the facilities are officially open potentially from midnight Monday the 4th of April, which therefore means open to all Tuesday the 5th of April. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, and the second thing is that third bullet point where it says alignment with any staff COVID policy. Is that like in my situation where I can do a RAT test and enter?
We have considered our staff policy, and the intent is to bring it into alignment with this decision in relation to the access to our council facilities.
So if I, myself and others that need to enter council facilities, i.e. civic building, I can, or currently are doing a RAT test, as long as it's negative I can enter, because I don't have a vaccine pass. Would that be the case if future restrictions were imposed again? That would still apply for me or others in...
Okay,
yeah.
if the necessity became to impose, if I'm understanding your question, if the necessity became again to impose some restrictions, then the requirement would be to comply with whatever those restrictions were at the time, for example, a RAT test. But this recommendation is the removal of all such requirements.
Yeah, yes, I kind of get that, but so one of the restrictions, or the main one, I guess, people see is that there'll no longer be vaccine passes required to enter our community facilities, and the civic building is one of those. And with that currently and still in place, I can enter with a negative test, and I'd say supervised, so it's legit, but it's lifted Tuesday potentially, and everyone is able to enter. But if you were to apply with the Mayor later on, some sort of a reintroduction of what we're currently in, would my situation as I am now align with, because staff can come to work if they're not vaccinated and they do the test too. Is that going to apply for me or others in my situation?
That would depend on what the situation was in the future, and I would anticipate that we would be aligning both staff and public to the same requirement, whatever that might or might not be. Does that answer the query?
In a roundabout way, and I'll just be hopeful.
I think, let's again through the mayor. The one thing we can be certain about is we wish to lift the restriction under the current settings, both for access of public to the council facilities and equally align our staff policy in terms of access in and out of our own workplaces. What we can't predict is what might happen in the future, but as this resolution says, that first dot point under 2.5, we would not be any more we'll be guided by government, and we wouldn't be any more restrictive than whatever the government guidelines was that applied at that time.
just my final response would be, yeah, so remain hopeful, but then following on from that third bullet point is the fourth one, where if you are affected by restrictions in the future, that I'd be able to access the services some other way, and up until now I've been able to Zoom, and then I kind of came in a bit early. Yeah.
Our sincere hope is to be as inclusive as we can be.
Ross, Councillor Brannigan.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Just a question on 2.4. I guess what I'm asking is if that does arise where you, Chief Executive and the Mayor have the delegation to impose restrictions, I presume, or would wish that would be obviously in discussion with councillors before any decisions made. Just confirm that, please.
I can give you that assurance, yes.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you. And I just want to be clear. So all of this is in line with or no more restrictive than government policy. And so, for example, if we remove the restrictions tonight, or if we said with immediacy, the requirements for either vaccinated or unvaccinated people would be still wearing a mask where it was required, etc., etc. So we would still have some measures of health and safety within the guidelines we're following.
The answer, I think, to that is yes, and I'm looking across your shoulder at Lisa. I mean, the main point is we will be guided by the government guidelines, and my recollection of them is that masks are still being encouraged for indoor settings.
I think it's a bit more than encouraged, isn't it? It's only encouraged.
Yeah, at this point it's only encouraged, and so that's what we will be going out with as well.
Certainly.
And there's one other aspect in all of this that hasn't been discussed, and that is that the requirement to do a risk assessment, and certainly based on the WorkSafe and other government guidelines, and certainly for our own staff position, we've done that risk assessment, which is why we are comfortable to align it with the recommendation for what happens in terms of access to our council facilities.
Lisa, I just note that in the report it does say face masks are still required in most indoor settings.
And that was my point of
That was my understanding as well.
Beyond the fourth, yeah.
I'll just come back to you on that, because the reading I had was that they were going to make them encouraged. So we'll check and we can come back.
So in the attachment on page 12, under the red setting, it does say other face mask rules remain unchanged. Face masks are still required in most indoor settings. Most. Deputy Mayor Mason.
And that was exactly my point of clarity, because to give me comfort in thinking that if there is an appetite around council to remove the mandate requirement, then it gives an extra layer of protection of mask wearing indoors, which are what all of the facilities we're talking about are still required. So I wanted that confirmed ahead of it going to a vote.
So I can confirm it is inside indoors except for swimming pools. So those facilities aren't required.
Okay, so we now have the recommendations 2.3, 2.4, 2.5 in front of us. Can I have a mover and a seconder for those, please? Councillor Isaac, seconded Councillor Mitchell. Any further debate, discussion? Councillor Jennings.
Yeah, look, I just want to briefly speak against the motion. I believe that the requirement should be removed immediately. I acknowledge that there's only 3 or 4 days in it, but consistent with my position at the previous meeting when this requirement was brought in, I believe that the environment is very different. The vaccine pass requirement, from my perspective, is entirely redundant at this point. I acknowledge, obviously, that if the requirement was to be implemented immediately, that there is quite a bit of work in the background for staff, and I acknowledge that. But I think that could be potentially managed if this resolution fails and then there is support for a decision to immediately remove, that there's an acknowledgement that obviously it's going to take a day or two to actually implement it in terms of updating websites. But I think we can send a clear message tonight around where we see that vaccine pass requirement sitting, and I certainly would be in favour of removing it immediately. So I won't be supporting the resolution as it currently stands.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. And if I'm to be consistent with my original position, that was to bring the vaccine passport in, I would prefer to wait until Tuesday, or 1 minute to 1 on Monday night. I see that there are 5,236 active cases in the mid-central region, 775 active cases in the Horowhenua, and that originally I voted for vaccine passes at council facilities because I wanted to basically protect those people that needed to use the hospital system. And that's really the sole reason for it, is so that our hospital systems can cope with the numbers going in there. And 775 active cases in the Horowhenua is still a lot of cases. I don't see that it has actually changed that much in the last month at all. So I'd be quite happy to go with the government's position, and that is to wait until 1 minute to 1 on Monday night.
Councillor Brannigan.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. Myself, as well as an alternate view to Councillor Jennings, we have followed the best government advice, health advice to the government throughout this pandemic. There is absolutely no significant benefit for us not doing so for the final 4 or 5 days or 6 days, whatever it may be, to our community and wider community. There's simply no significant benefit to removing it overnight, but there may well be some significant benefit by holding off until Monday night at midnight. We should continue to follow the best advice from health, and again, I see no significant benefit for not doing so. It makes no sense to do that, in my view.
Councillor Bishop.
Again, thank you. And again, for consistency, what I voted for when I was able to contribute to the conversation when we put this policy in place. I support the stance of Councillor Jennings, and I don't want to draw out any long debate or call on any stats or scientific stuff, but I think we've moved on, and 4 days, if we're going to hold so firm for another 4 days, it really puts the position in 4 days in some fairly flaky space, I think, because if those numbers are still there, hospital admissions, yet you're prepared to drop the policy, it's a complete 180-degree turn from what the debate is today. So, look, let's all move on.
Councillor Keddick.
taka kei te rongo au ngā kōrero o Councillor Jennings. Nā te mea a kōrero mai te taka ngāku. E kōrero ki te tautoko au ki a Councillor Jennings. E pāne ki te take hei mui a tātou. Yeah, I consistent with my view when we first put this on the table, and I'm just supporting what Councillor Jennings has stated in his kōrero, and yeah, we've already gone through much as a community, and yeah, I would like to see all those restrictions to be removed immediately.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
It's a difficult one because this was a difficult decision for me in the first round. But last week I had to take a family member to hospital who was suffering chest pains because she couldn't get an ambulance because of the pressure that's on the health system at the moment. So I experienced firsthand what is happening with the overwhelm in our health system. And it wasn't a particularly happy time for us. Fortunately, all is well now. So for that reason, while I would like to see, I am somewhat swayed by the immediacy, I am going to stick with my original consideration because I do have concerns about our health system and my personal experiences influencing me there.
Councillor Jennings, would you like to move an amendment to 2.3 then, in terms of changing the date?
Yes, if the table's happy for me to do that. Well, I mean, there was obviously still some people to speak, but yeah, I'm happy to move that amendment.
Okay, so can I take it from what you said before that council removes access restrictions to council facilities from 11:59 the 30th of March 2022?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that. I'd be happy to even just have immediately. Yeah, I think that might be better. And then there just need to be, and this perhaps doesn't need to be captured as part of the resolution, but I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that there will be inevitably some time tomorrow and possibly Friday for staff just to update websites and things like that. And so that might not be immediate in terms of the comms about it, but there's obviously some easy communications that council can make on Facebook and etc. to obviously implement the decision immediately.
Only one point, if I might make it, Your Worship. Are our aquatic centres, the Billabong Aquatic Centre, is that still open until what time tonight? 9. So would that cause a problem with aquatics? Just one question.
It probably would. So that's why I suggest that it would, I don't think immediately is probably the right word to use. It needs to be from a time and date. Yeah. Well, from a time and date, and that's why 11:59 PM on the 30th of March, I think is specific enough to...
For expediency, yeah. I'm happy to move that.
The only other question I have is that our cafe inside Te Takere will still need a vaccine pass requirement for the next few days because that is the government guidelines at the moment, is that they need to follow that guideline. Can I just get that they have been through that situation previously before anyway, haven't they?
Yes, they have. So they previously, before the mandate was introduced, they did have to check the vaccine passes themselves. But obviously, when it was introduced, it took a workload off them having to do it.
Okay, before I get to Councillor Brannigan, can I just, is there a seconder to Councillor Jennings' amendment? There is, Councillor Kedu, so which, Councillor Brannigan.
Yeah, well, just some advice. I understood there was the substantive movement on the motion on the table. Don't we have to deal with that first?
Once a motion has been moved and seconded, there is, and is open for debate, there is the option for moving amendments to that substantive motion. If the amendment is passed, that then becomes a substantive motion. If it is lost, it then returns to the original motion. If I might, Your Worship, the movers of 2.3, 2.4 and 2.5 councillors Isaacs and Mitchell may want to restrict that just to item 2.3 whilst we deal with the amendment. The reason being is if the amendments, the question would be whether you still want 2.4 and 2.5 to stand on their own, and if you're just concerned about the closure date.
So I think we will take the amendment as for 2.3 and see what happens as a result of that, and then move to 2.4, 2.5, depending on the outcome of that vote. So is there any discussion or debate around the amendment first? Councillor Brannigan.
Yeah, thank you, Bishop. Listen, I struggle to think that, given the commentary just from Mr. Harvey just now, that we're seriously going to look at changing the state. We adopted this mandate, vaccine pass mandate, for the reasons of public health and safety of our staff, and health and safety of customers coming into our facilities. I'll just put it again that there just seems to be no significant benefit to do that and create the amount of work amount of discomfort and amount of work that's going to become of this for a couple of days. We simply need to follow my view. We simply need to follow the health lead, buy some more time, as Councillor Mitchell outlined. There are still cases in our community, and still a lot of cases. The reported ones is far more than the reported ones, as we all know. I know of people today that have gone down with COVID myself, and some are unwell. So I just urge councillors to rethink this. It's just not right.
Very well. Councillor Tukapu.
Yeah, I'm no health expert, but at least the media coverage or the Prime Minister's announcements, the Omicron or that variant is not as severe as perhaps the other one and is more widespread. I acknowledge that, but if we drill down to, you mentioned Mid-Central, 186,000, I think, is the population roughly. But we all know that data is not accurate. And an example is we have youth. I used to be on the board at HLC, and not all our youth have a GP, so they're not registered to a doctor and therefore not in the Mid-Central Health database. So their numbers are not included. And then if we take a step deeper and look at Horowhenua, 775, I think you said, we've got 36,000 people here So actually that number is about 2% of our population. And I will acknowledge, because that data is not accurate, there's possibly more than the 700 that have got it. But further to that is, whilst the government has gone to extremes to save lives, I appreciate that totally, especially around elderly, but they didn't set an agenda to save livelihoods. They've chosen one over the other instead of trying to achieve both. It could have achieved both. So my earlier questions around, how does this apply to me? I don't want the public to think I was concerned for myself. Not at all. I was just trying to highlight how some of this doesn't make sense. And if I can do a rat test to enter, then the others in my situation should be able to too. So I'm actually more concerned about potential restrictions being reintroduced later for them, how that's going to impact them. We've got communities like Shannon who have, a lot of them are not vaccinated, so, and they need to access, public facilities. There's huge needs in our community from all angles, and I'll come back to the point that I made even in the debate that, how can you be charged for something that you're no longer allowed to use? Like, there's a difference between choosing not to use it and being excluded from using it. So, whilst I initially was just going to go along and think, oh yeah, okay, it's only a few days away, but I will support the opening from, 11:59, 30th of March, and hope that, it passes.
I too will be supporting the amendment. While I don't have had no qualms about introducing this requirement at the time, I believe now the time has moved on. As an operator of a business that has, used the compliance that around vaccine, hasn't had to use the requirement of vaccine passes in my business has been maintained without any problems whatsoever. In fact, I've been pleasantly surprised that people have responded to that extremely well, and the fact that they can enter my business without having to have a vaccine pass has been in some sort of relief for me as an operator, because I haven't had to be a policeman in terms of having to do that. But there is no doubt that while COVID is still very much an issue in our community, and unfortunately people will continue to get it, it is where the use of masks, sanitisation, and ultimately the best protection is to get vaccinated and boosted. The chances of actually getting COVID are remarkably reduced, and the impact and effects are also remarkably reduced. But I think it is now time to move on. The government has signalled that it is time to move on, and I think we should not wait. I think we should do it now too. Councillor Jennings.
Just a query, do I get a right to reply in relation to the amendment?
Yes.
Is that anyone? Any possible speak? No? Look, I just wanted to briefly say, I really do want to acknowledge the comments from Councillor Brannigan. He's obviously, obviously immersed in this space in his emergency management role, and in his, I really respect his views and understanding of the situation. For me, the issue of COVID is it's spread far and wide through our community, and I'm just not convinced that us maintaining a vaccine pass requirement for another 3 days it is going to make any material difference to that story at all. And in fact, if the recommendation had come in this paper that we maintained the requirement until the 4th, but that people without a vaccination pass were given the option of a RAT test over the next 3 days, I probably would have supported that. But again, unfortunately, one of the things that's happened through COVID is we're presented with stark choices between sort of black and white, and it's either vaccine pass or it's not. So for that reason, I think this is the right call for right now, and I'm looking forward to those vaccine requirements being gone.
Just for the sake of clarity, I will ask for a division so that especially Councillor Brannigan, who's on Zoom, can ensure that his vote's taken. So, Councillor Brannigan, I'll start with you. Are you for or against the motion?
Yeah, against, thanks.
Against, thank you. Deputy Mayor Mason? Against. Councillor Bishop? For. Councillor Isaacs? For. Councillor Mitchell?
Against.
Councillor Kedu? Councillor Tupapua?
For.
Councillor Jennings?
Or
And myself for. One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
So 9, so we've got against Ross,
Joe.
Joe, Chris, 3 against.
Yeah.
6 in favour.
Okay. So the amendment is carried 6-3. So then we just need to move 2.4 and 2.5. Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Isaacs, as before, are you prepared to move and second those? Okay, any discussion or further debate? I'll put the motion. All those in favour? Councillor Brannigan, you're supporting that motion? Thank you.
Yes, support.
So the motion is carried. Thank you. And that means that we can now, there are some logistics that we also need to discuss, and I'm going to ask the Acting Chief Executive if he would just bring those to the table. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a consequence of that decision, I just appreciate, or we would appreciate, some guidance going forward in relation to use of the council chamber. So there's 3 aspects to it. One is meetings continuing in person. I'm assuming that that would be a yes. The second one is contractors or external people then presenting to council. What is your desire? That is back to in person? It's nods around the room.
I was going to say, wouldn't that be their choice? If someone, for
Oh.
example, has health issues and they'd rather Zoom in, should they not be able to do that?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry, it's your. I'm just trying to get a feeling for your wishes. And thirdly, the public able to attend in person in the council chambers or via the screen in the lobby. In person.
I'm strongly of the view that the crowds of people that desire to come to our meeting should be allowed back into chambers. The issue will be spacing, given that there are so many that are so keen to come. But
Well, Councillor Jennings, there's a group of them with placards at the door at the moment. So I think that's unanimous.
Well, I'd be interested to know how this building was certified as a healthy airspace. Interested to read some commentary from experts saying that they're thinking that maybe buildings should actually be coded according to how good they are at taking out germs in the atmosphere.
Are you requesting a requisition for about 20 fans to be put inside the building or something?
Oh, I'd just be interested to know, do we have like HEPA filters, our air conditioning system, does it just circulate the germs or does it somehow take them out? I'd be interested to know.
Perhaps we could just take that one on notice to check out what the situation is Of course, there's always the option to wear masks.
Yes. Anything else?
No,
That was it? Okay. There being no further business, I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you.